6 loyal dogs and 1 brave little girl. A miracle no one saw coming. When a child loses her voice to grief and the town forgets how to hope, 6 hearts of gold stand by her side. And what happens next under the bright light of a rainbow sky proves that sometimes healing comes from 4 feet. If you ever believed that love would find a way, this story will stay with you long after the last note has been played. Maple Creek was a small town tucked away in the northern hills of Vermont, where autumn reigned like a quiet, benevolent queen. Every street was painted in molten reds, fiery oranges, and deep golds, as though the earth itself had caught fire with the turning of the season. The air was crisp and biting, swirling with fallen leaves that skittered like tiny dancers across the cracked sidewalks. Maple Creek was preparing for its grandest event of the year, the Harvest Festival, and laughter spilled from shop fronts and front porches. Yet at the very edge of town, tucked beyond an old stone bridge, there was a weathered farmhouse where no decorations hung, no laughter escaped, and no pumpkins glowed. Inside that house lived Ellie Mae Carson, a 6-year-old girl with hair the color of corn silk and wide, solemn blue eyes that had once been full of mischief, but now seemed almost too old for her tender age. Ellie had been a lively spirit, once a chatterbox who could name every tree in Maple Creek and every star she thought she could see. But tragedy had folded her small world into itself. Only months ago, a freak snowstorm had trapped her parents. David and Laura Carson, both experienced mountaineers and celebrated dog trainers, on a climb in the Green Mountains. The rescue teams arrived too late. There were no survivors. Since that day, Ellie had not spoken a single word. Joe Carson. Ellie's grandfather was a tall, stooped man with a head full of snowy white hair and deeply lined hands that trembled slightly even on the best days. He had once been the town's clockmaker, a man of patience and precision, but now time itself seemed something he could no longer fix. Helen Carson. His wife was a small, rounded woman with soft eyes that always looked tired, yet still managed to glimmer with a stubborn kindness. Age and grief had bowed their shoulders and slowed their steps, but they wrapped Ellie in the only thing they had left to offer steadfast love. And then there were the dogs, 6 golden retrievers. Each a living testament to the life David and Laura had built remained with Ellie. They moved through the house like golden ghosts, each one different, each one carrying a piece of memory, a piece of hope. Sonny, the eldest at 8 years old, had fur like melted sunshine, and a wisdom in his amber eyes that seemed almost human. He was the leader, the calm in any storm, the one who would always sit nearest Ellie, understanding without needing words. Maple, gentle and nurturing, was slightly smaller, her golden coat streaked with lighter patches along her sides. She loved to lean against Ellie whenever the girl sat pressing close as if to pour her own strength into the child's frail body. River, a 5-year-old male, was the most energetic, with a knack for finding lost things. Sock's toys, sometimes even lost hope. His boundless enthusiasm was a flickering reminder of better times. Willow, slender and slightly timid, had a sleek, darker golden coat and an uncanny ability to sense the moods of those around her. She would often lie near Ellie, head on paws, simply listening to the silence that filled the house. Rusty, the largest of the group, bore a deeper reddish hue to his coat and a bravery unmatched. His heavy frame and fearless nature belied a tender heart that often led him to guard Ellie like a vigilant knight. Honey. The baby of the pack, at only 3 years old, had the softest, palest fur and a tendency to curl up tightly against Ellie's side whenever the night grew too heavy with sadness. Her big, imploring brown eyes seemed to beg the world to be gentle once more. The farmhouse, once filled with the chatter of dog training sessions, had fallen into a reverent quiet. Dust gathered on unused equipment and leashes hung limp on their hooks. Outside, the townspeople hammered banners and set up booths for the Harvest Festival, the scent of caramel apples and wood smoke curling into the cool air. Children laughed and chased each other with handfuls of leaves, while Mr. Abernathy, the town's wiry old mayor with a penchant for tweed suits and booming speeches, orchestrated the preparations with military precision. But inside Ellie's world, the seasons changed without celebration. Every morning after Helen prepared a simple breakfast porridge with too much honey because Ellie used to love it that way, the 6 dogs would form a silent procession outside Ellie's door. They didn't whine or bark. They simply waited, tails wagging gently until Ellie emerged, her tiny frame lost inside one of her father's old flannel shirts. She would sit on the top step of the porch, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, and stare into the golden woods where the world had kept spinning without her. The dogs flanked her one by one, forming a circle of fur and warmth and loyalty against the creeping cold of loneliness. Joe would watch from the kitchen window, his gnarled hands cradling a chipped coffee mug, his heart breaking a little more each day. Helen would often sit beside him, knitting a blanket that grew longer but never seemed to find its end, whispering prayers under her breath. Sometimes Sonny would nudge a toy toward Ellie, an old rubber ball faded and cracked, or River would perform clumsy somersaults trying to draw a giggle that never came. Honey would snuffle into Ellie's hand, and for the briefest moment the girl's fingers would tighten, holding on to something, someone. On Saturdays, when the Harvest Festival preparations were at their peak, Noah Bennett, a scrappy 7-year-old boy with a mop of untamed brown hair and a smudge of dirt eternally streaking his cheek, would often dash by the Carson farmhouse with his own dog, a mischievous beagle named Scout. Noah had a smile that could light up an entire room, but carried the lingering sadness of a boy who had lost his mother to illness 2 years prior. Perhaps it was that invisible thread of grief that tied him to Ellie in ways neither of them yet understood. But Ellie never answered Noah's cheerful greetings. She would only watch, eyes distant, arms tightening around herself, as if the very thought of connection could break her fragile shell. Inside the house, bills began to pile up. Veterinary costs, dog food heating repairs. The burden grew heavier by the week. Joe and Helen whispered about it late at night, voices low with fear and guilt. But they could not imagine a world where Ellie's 6 golden angels were not by her side. The Harvest Festival drew nearer. Lights began to twinkle in the town square, 1,000 tiny stars against the darkening nights. Pumpkins lined the streets, scarecrows waved in the chilly wind, and laughter echoed under the crisp sky. Everyone prepared for joy. Everyone except for the weathered house at the edge of town where grief huddled close and 6 loyal hearts beat in unison around a little girl who had forgotten how to speak. And so, as Maple Creek buzzed with excitement and color, the Carson farmhouse remained an island of stillness, guarded by 6 golden sentinels, who understood better than anyone that sometimes the greatest love is the quietest. The morning sun in Maple Creek did little to warm the biting chill that clung to the town like a second skin. Thin wisps of fog curled along the cracked sidewalks, weaving between the pumpkins and hay bales arranged for the Harvest Festival. The Carson farmhouse, however, remained untouched by the festivities, standing like a quiet sentinel on the outskirts, a world apart from the laughter that bubbled through the town square. Inside the house, Ellie sat at the window seat, her knees drawn up to her chest, her forehead pressed against the cold glass. She wore an oversized knitted sweater that once belonged to her mother, sleeves hanging well past her fingertips. Her blonde hair, usually tangled in playful chaos, now hung limp around her face. The only movements in the house came from 6 loyal shadows that orbited her world without question or demand. Sonny, the eldest, approached first. His muzzle dusted with gray brushed gently against a wooden chest tucked near the window. After a moment of sniffing, he nudged it open with his nose, pulling free a familiar item. Laura Carson's favorite knitted hat, faded green with a little yellow flower embroidered on the side. Sonny clamped it delicately between his teeth and trotted over to Ellie, setting the hat on her lap with a soft woof. Ellie's fingers hesitated, then reached out, stroking the worn fabric. Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't pull away. Maple, always the comforter, sidled up close and rested her broad head heavily against Ellie's thigh. her warm breath fogging the glass slightly. There was a steadiness in Maple's presence, a silent heartbeat that seemed to anchor Ellie against the storm inside her chest. Nearby River, with his boundless energy coiled tightly like a spring, sensed the heavy air and made his own clumsy attempt to lighten it. He spun in chaotic circles across the worn carpet, his tail wagging so vigorously that it sent a nearby stack of magazines tumbling to the floor. For a fleeting second, Ellie's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but enough to light a spark behind her solemn blue eyes. Willow watched from the corner, her darker golden coat gleaming in the morning light, head cocked in patient attention. Rusty stretched out near the hearth, keeping one protective eye cracked open, while Honey, smallest and most sensitive, crept forward and curled into a tight ball against Ellie's side, offering nothing but silent warmth. At the kitchen table, Joe and Helen exchanged glances over their coffee mugs, hearts breaking at the fragile flickers of life they saw in Ellie, wishing they could fan those sparks into flames. Helen, sturdy despite her small frame, wore her usual faded apron dusted with flour. She had once been known for her apple pies at the Harvest Festival contests, but this year the oven sat cold and silent. Joe's weathered hands, once steady from decades of clockwork repair, trembled slightly as he unfolded a small envelope that had arrived with the morning post. It was cream-colored, handwritten in careful looping script. Amanda Holloway. Maple Creek's newest elementary school teacher had penned the note herself. Amanda Holloway was a woman in her early 30s, tall and willowy with long auburn hair often braided down her back. She had a calm, patient demeanor marked by a ready smile and eyes the color of stormy sea's eyes that hinted at a depth of understanding forged through her own past loss. Rumor had it that Amanda had once lived in the city and had left behind a promising career after the sudden death of her younger brother. She had sought refuge in Maple Creek's slower rhythms, hoping to mend what was broken inside her. Her letter was simple and kind. She invited Ellie to join the newly formed Hope Seeds Club, a small group where children cared for rescued animals after school. No expectations, no pressure, just a safe place for quiet healing. Helen read the letter aloud, her voice cracking once or twice, and placed it gently on the table. Joe rubbed his jaw, thoughtful. "It could be good for her," he murmured, glancing toward the living room where 6 golden shapes moved around Ellie like constellations. Helen nodded, though her heart ached with the fear of asking too much from the little girl who had already lost so much. But it has to be her choice. Later that afternoon, Helen tucked the invitation into a small wicker basket alongside a crisp red apple and a jar of homemade peach jam. She left the basket outside Ellie's door with a soft knock, but didn't wait for an answer. Inside, Ellie listened, her small hands curling into the fabric of the green hat. Slowly, she slid off the window seat, padded over to the door, and cracked it open. The basket sat there like a quiet offering. Curious, she knelt and pulled out the envelope, opening it with hesitant fingers. Her eyes scanned the neat handwriting lingering on the words, "Hope and Animals," as if the letters themselves breathed warmth. Sonny appeared at her side, resting his chin on her knee, as if reading the invitation with her. Maple and Willow pressed close. River bounded back and forth with barely contained excitement. Rusty watched steadily from the hallway, and Honey pawed at Ellie's sleeve gently. There was no pressure in their touch, no demand, only presence, only love. Ellie looked up, meeting Sonny's unwavering gaze. In his amber eyes she saw not expectation, but an invitation. "You are not alone." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the dying leaves across the porch. A heavy gust sent a spiral of scarlet and gold twirling into the air, a dance of endings and beginnings. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ellie made a decision. She tucked the letter into her sweater pocket, pressed the faded green hat snugly over her blonde hair, and stepped onto the porch. The dogs surged around her, a golden tide of joy, and for a moment, just a fleeting heartbeat of time, Ellie smiled. It was not the loud smile of a child unmarked by sorrow. It was a quiet, fierce thing, a smile born from surviving, from daring to hope. In the distance, the Harvest Festival lights flickered on, casting a soft glow over the town square. Music began to drift through the air, faint, hopeful strains, and for the first time in a long time, Maple Creek didn't seem quite so far away. The morning mist clung to Maple Creek like a secret weaving itself through the branches of the grand sugar maples that crowned the winding trails beyond the town square. The air was cool, but not biting the kind that made every breath feel clean and a little sharper. The Harvest Festival was only a day away, and the streets pulsed with quiet excitement, though none of that energy touched the ancient woods at the town's edge, where Ellie now stood bundled in her mother's old knitted sweater and flanked by her 6 loyal golden retrievers. Today was an important day. Ellie had agreed through a simple nod and a tight squeeze of Honey's fur to attend the first meeting of the Hope Seeds Club. It was a small, tentative step, but for the Carson family it was a miracle. Helen had packed a small lunch in a brown paper bag decorated with a smiling sun, and Joe had made sure Ellie's boots were tied snugly before watching her disappear down the dirt path toward the meeting spot, a clearing known as Lantern Grove. Lantern Grove was a small meadow carved out of the woods named for the way the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden shafts during the late afternoon. The clearing was encircled by towering maple trees, their vibrant leaves forming a natural cathedral overhead. A rough wooden sign marked the entrance, hand-painted in cheery red letters. Hope Seeds Club, where new beginnings grow. Amanda Holloway stood by the entrance, her tall frame wrapped in a soft gray sweater, a thick woolen scarf tucked under her chin. Her auburn braids swung gently as she waved to the approaching children. Her smile was steady, genuine, and unforced, the kind of smile that said, "Take your time. I'll be here." Amanda had always loved animals, finding in them a pure, unspoken comfort during her darkest days. After losing her younger brother, she found cities too loud, too fast, and too indifferent. Maple Creek had become her refuge, and she hoped with cautious optimism it could be the same for these children who carried invisible wounds. There were about a dozen children gathered in the clearing, most laughing nervously or clutching the leashes of the dogs and small animals they had brought. Ellie hesitated at the edge, her 6 dogs forming a living wall around her. Sonny stood closest to her head high, surveying the scene with measured calm. River bounced anxiously on his paws, eager for any excuse to play, while Maple leaned against Ellie's leg, a reassuring weight. A voice broke through the buzz of the group, a boy's voice, bright and teasing. "Wow, that's like an army of gold." Ellie turned slightly, peeking out from behind Maple. Standing nearby was a boy about her age, maybe a little older, with messy brown hair that refused to stay flat under his baseball cap and wide green eyes filled with mischief. He wore a red puffer jacket, a size too big, and held a fraying leash attached to a stout beagle who was busy trying to dig a hole at his feet. Noah Bennett. Noah was known around town as the dog boy, always seen with a new furry friend in tow. He had an infectious laugh and an easy way with people. Yet there was a sadness beneath his energy, a small fissure that those who knew him well recognized. His mother had passed away from an illness when he was barely 5, leaving him and his father a quiet man named Tom Bennett, who worked at the local lumber mill to stitch together a life from the pieces left behind. Noah grinned, seemingly undeterred by Ellie's silence. He squatted down to River's level and offered a hand, which the energetic Golden instantly licked enthusiastically. "Hey, buddy, you look like you could outrun a tornado." River wagged his tail so hard that it thudded against Sonny's side, earning a patient grunt from the elder dog. Ellie's lips twitched at the sight, a tiny seed of a smile curling in the corner of her mouth before she quickly hid it behind her sleeve. Amanda clapped her hands together gently. "All right, Hope Seeds, today we're going to explore the trail and see if we can find signs of the changing season. Keep your eyes open for anything special." The children scattered into smaller groups, pairs and trios, some dashing off immediately, others hanging back shyly. Ellie lingered at the edge, uncertain until Noah bounded over his beagle, tugging impatiently at his leash. "Come on," Noah said with the easy confidence of someone who never considered that he might not be followed. "Scout and I are treasure hunters. You in—" Ellie hesitated. Sonny nudged her gently from behind. and River barked a short, excited sound. Slowly, cautiously, Ellie nodded. They wandered deeper into the grove, the carpet of fallen leaves crunching under their boots. River bounded ahead, darting in and out of sight between the trunks, while Scout trailed behind, nose to the ground. Maple Willow, Rusty, and Honey stayed close to Ellie, their golden coats gleaming in the scattered light. As they moved, Noah chatted easily about his dog Scout's many escapades, about the treehouse he was building with his dad, about his dream to one day train rescue dogs. He didn't seem to mind that Ellie didn't respond. He talked enough for both of them, filling the silence with stories and laughter that floated around them like falling leaves. They were rounding a bend when Honey suddenly veered off the path, nose to the ground, tail wagging furiously. She barked once sharply, drawing everyone's attention. Ellie hurried after, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. Honey had stopped beneath an ancient maple, her paws scratching at the thick bed of leaves. Nestled there, half buried in the gold and red, was a small object. Ellie knelt and brushed away the debris with trembling fingers. In her hand she lifted a delicate hair clip shaped like a butterfly, its metal wings worn but still sparkling faintly in the afternoon sun. It was her mother's. She remembered the way Laura had always worn it on special days, the way it caught the light when she threw her head back to laugh. Ellie stared at the clip, her chest tightening painfully. For a long moment, everything, the wind, the children's laughter, the distant calls of birds, faded into a soft, aching silence. And then, without warning, tears flooded her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. But these were not the wrenching, hopeless tears she had shed the night she learned of her parents' deaths. These tears were something gentler, something cleaner. A mourning, yes, but also a remembering. Noah, sensing the change, dropped to a crouch beside her, his face serious for the first time since they'd met. He didn't say anything. He simply sat quietly, Scout leaning against his side. Sonny moved to press his head against Ellie's shoulder, while Maple rested her chin on Ellie's knee. Honey whined softly, nudging the butterfly clip into Ellie's hand again. Ellie cradled the clip to her chest, sobbing quietly into the thick golden fur surrounding her. She wasn't alone in her sadness. She wasn't lost. She was here, still breathing, still loved. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the sun broke fully through the canopy, painting the grove in brilliant gold. It was not the end of her grief, but it was a beginning. The golden afternoon melted into a cool, amber-tinted evening as Ellie stood at the edge of Lantern Grove, the familiar weight of 6 warm bodies pressing around her. The Hope Seeds Club had become a gentle routine now, a place where Ellie's silence wasn't a burden, and her small, rare smiles were treated like precious treasures. Around her the trees sighed in the early autumn wind, and the other children laughed as they darted among the fallen leaves. The world, it seemed, was starting to move again, and this time Ellie was beginning to move with it. Noah Bennett was waiting by the old oak stump that had been unofficially claimed as the meeting spot. His red puffer jacket was smeared with streaks of mud, and his cheeks were flushed from chasing Scout, his overzealous beagle, through the grove. Noah's wild hair was barely tamed by his cap, and his shoelaces trailed behind him like ribbons as he bounded toward Ellie. "Come on, we're starting the reading circle!" he shouted, waving an arm so vigorously that he nearly toppled over. Amanda Holloway, the young teacher with the ocean-gray eyes, gathered the children into a loose circle on a worn picnic blanket beneath the largest maple tree. Her auburn braid glinted in the fading sunlight, and her calm voice drifted through the air like music, calling everyone to settle. Ellie hesitated. Crowds, even small ones, still made her chest tighten and her hands tremble. She could feel her breath snag in her throat, the ghosts of fear whispering around the edges of her mind. Sensing her hesitation, Willow, the slender golden retriever with the darker golden coat, moved to Ellie's side. Willow had a quiet grace, an almost uncanny stillness that she reserved only for moments like this. She lowered herself slowly onto the ground beside Ellie, her body radiating a steady calm. Without thinking, Ellie dropped to her knees, pressing her small hand into Willow's soft fur. Amanda smiled warmly from across the clearing, giving a slight nod of encouragement, but not forcing anything. She simply opened a large storybook and began to read aloud, her voice smooth and rich like warm honey. As Amanda read about a young fox searching for home across the seasons, Ellie listened not just to the words, but to the steady beat of Willow's breathing, the comforting weight of her side against Ellie's knees. Willow didn't ask anything of her. She simply stayed a silent guardian against the overwhelming tide. For the first time in months, Ellie listened to a story without feeling like she was drowning. Later, as the reading circle ended, Amanda announced that it was time for a game. Simple, easy, no winners or losers, just a chance to move and laugh. Noah was already bouncing on the balls of his feet, Scout yapping enthusiastically at his heels. Rusty, the largest and most protective of Ellie's golden retrievers, caught the shift in energy immediately. His broad, reddish-gold body tensed, then he glanced back at Ellie, his dark eyes urging her forward. Amanda held up a bright red rubber ball. "Who wants to play catch with the dogs?" The children whooped and cheered. Ellie shrank back, the noise sharp against her ears. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't ready. She wasn't like them. Then she felt Rusty's nose press firmly against her hand. Not pushing, not forcing, just there, steady and certain. Noah noticed and jogged over, grinning. "You don't have to throw it far," he said casually, tossing the ball a short distance and laughing as Scout pounced on it and promptly ran in the wrong direction. "It's just for fun." Ellie looked down at Rusty. He sat solemnly beside her tail, wagging once a slow and deliberate beat against the earth. His presence was a shield, a promise. "You can try. I'll be here." With trembling fingers, Ellie reached for the ball Amanda offered. It was heavier than she expected. The whole clearing seemed to hold its breath. She pulled her arm back and tossed the ball. It wobbled wildly in the air, not going far at all, but that didn't matter. Rusty shot off like a bullet, muscles rippling, bounding after the ball as if she had thrown it into the next county. He snagged it triumphantly and raced back tail high, the very picture of K9 joy. The children cheered. Noah whooped. Amanda clapped her hands. Rusty dropped the ball at Ellie's feet with a low, happy rumble of approval. And Ellie. Ellie laughed. A real laugh, high and soft and a little cracked from disuse, but a laugh nonetheless. Her hand flew to her mouth, startled at the sound, but it was too late. The warmth had already bloomed inside her, chasing away the lingering cold. In the trees above, the late sun threaded gold through the rustling leaves. Lantern Grove shone like a secret pocket of magic. For once, Ellie wasn't just watching life happen around her. She was part of it. Later that night, back at the Carson farmhouse, the glow of the day still lingered around Ellie as she leaned sleepily against Sonny's broad side. Joe and Helen watched from the kitchen doorway, their hearts both heavy and light. Helen smiled through the sting of tears. "She's coming back to us." Joe nodded, but his face was troubled. In his hand he held a letter from Maple Creek Veterinary Clinic. It was thin, but heavy with consequences. The vet bills for the 6 dogs had been manageable at first. David and Laura had left some savings, and Joe had picked up odd jobs around town to stretch them. But the costs were climbing: food, medical care, preventative treatments. And with winter approaching, heating expenses would rise too. Joe stared down at the numbers, the polite reminder about overdue payments, and the warning that further delays could risk the dog's health. His old heart clenched painfully at the thought. They couldn't afford this forever. Hard choices loomed ahead, dark and looming like the heavy clouds gathering on the horizon. Joe folded the letter and tucked it away, unwilling to darken the fragile light that had finally returned to their home. Tomorrow he would worry about it. Tonight he would let the sounds of Ellie's laughter echo softly through the farmhouse, wrapping them all in a cocoon of hope. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight, for the first time in too long, they had a beginning. The Harvest Festival had always been the brightest jewel in Maple Creek's crown, a day when the whole town came alive with music, laughter, and the rich scent of baked apples and cinnamon. Lanterns swayed from every tree branch, and colorful booths dotted the town square, each manned by familiar faces offering hot cider, pumpkin pie, and handcrafted trinkets. The laughter of children and the murmur of neighbors catching up filled the crisp air. Ellie stood at the edge of the bustling crowd, her 6 golden retrievers forming a semicircle around her like a living, breathing wall of gold. She clutched the sleeve of her oversized sweater, feeling the comforting brush of Willow's tail against her ankle. Sunny sat at her left, ever watchful, while River darted excitedly from booth to booth, tethered carefully to a long leash Joe had tied around his belt. Joe and Helen watched Ellie from a nearby bench sipping cider from paper cups. Joe's face was lined with quiet pride, but shadowed by worry. The worry that had deepened ever since the letter from the veterinary clinic had arrived. Tonight, though, he forced a smile determined to give Ellie and himself a few precious hours of peace. The square was bustling with more people than usual, and among the milling crowd was Tom Bennett, a rugged man in his late 30s with calloused hands, sharp blue eyes, and a sadness etched deeply around his mouth. He wore a thick flannel jacket and kept one eye on Noah, who raced through the booths with Scout, his beagle, in tow. Tom had been a solitary figure since his wife's passing, finding solace in hard work and raising Noah the best he could. His stern demeanor often masked the fierce love he carried for his son, and he never strayed too far when Noah was near. The sky overhead, however, was shifting. Dark clouds gathered at the edges of the horizon, heavy and bruised, and the air grew thick with the electric smell of rain. Amanda Holloway noticed first, glancing up from the prize booth she was helping to run. Her heart twisted with unease, though she continued handing out caramel apples to eager children. A loudspeaker crackled to life as Mayor Abernathy, still wearing his customary tweed jacket despite the chill, stepped onto the stage. He was a wiry man with a booming voice that could cut through any storm. "Folks, we've got some weather rolling in faster than expected," he announced. "We're going to start packing up. Please find your kids and make your way home safely." The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. Ellie gripped Sunny's fur tighter, sensing the change. Around her, the 6 dogs stilled their bodies, tense, their ears twitching toward the coming storm. Honey whined softly at her side. Joe and Helen rose from their bench, making their way toward Ellie. In the chaos of booths being dismantled and crowds herding toward cars and sidewalks, nobody noticed that Noah and Scout had slipped away toward the woods on the far side of the festival grounds, the edge of Lantern Grove, where the trees thickened into a dense, wild tangle. Nobody but Sunny. Sunny growled low, almost inaudible, his body snapping to attention. Ellie followed his gaze, heart lurching. A flash of red, the back of Noah's jacket disappeared into the trees. Ellie's chest tightened. She didn't need words. She didn't need to think. Somewhere deep inside she knew. Noah was in trouble. Before Helen or Joe could reach her, Ellie broke into a run, the 6 dogs surging with her like golden arrows shot from a single bow. The wind whipped her hair around her face as the first fat drops of rain splattered the ground. They plunged into the woods. The trees closed in around them, branches clawing at the air, leaves ripped free by the gathering gale. The forest floor was a mess of slick mud and broken twigs. Ellie stumbled but kept going, driven by an instinct stronger than fear. Sunny led the charged nose to the ground, his muscles taut with urgency. Rusty, the powerful protector, flanked Ellie's left, his deep growls vibrating in the tense air. River darted ahead, zigzagging like a compass needle gone mad, pausing to bark sharply whenever he picked up Scout's scent. Willow Maple and Honey stayed close, shielding Ellie from the worst of the storm's fury. The rain thickened into a downpour, turning the trail into a treacherous slick. Thunder rumbled overhead like a giant's drumbeat. Ellie shivered, soaked to the skin, but didn't slow. Rusty suddenly threw his head back and howled a deep, resonant sound that rolled through the trees. The others picked it up. Sunny's bark, River's sharp yips, Honey's high whine. Together it was a call, a signal. They had found something. River darted left, leading them toward a small ravine where the earth dipped sharply. Ellie scrambled after him, mud caking her boots, her heart hammering. At the bottom of the ravine, caught between 2 fallen logs and a fast-rising stream, was Noah. He was trying to climb out his small hands, scrabbling at the slick earth, but every time he gained a foothold, it gave way under him. Scout barked frantically at his side paws muddy and soaked. Noah Ellie screamed the name ripping from her throat without thought, raw and desperate. Noah looked up, his face pale and streaked with rain. Ellie dropped to her knees at the edge of the ravine. Rusty braced beside her, lowering his body to form a sturdy anchor. Sonny moved to the front, gauging the best way down. Without hesitation, Sonny descended carefully, muscles rippling with control. River followed, using his lighter frame to dart down beside Noah. Sonny reached Noah first, pressing his broad body against the boy to keep him from slipping further. Ellie grabbed a fallen branch, anchoring herself against Rusty's weight, and stretched it down as far as she could. "Grab it!" she yelled. Noah reached fingers slipping twice before he finally caught hold. With Sonny's help from below and Rusty's solid mass anchoring her, Ellie pulled with everything she had. Her arms burned, her back ached, but she didn't let go. Bit by bit, inch by inch, Noah was hauled up onto solid ground. The second he was safe, Rusty lunged forward, licking Noah's face in wild relief. Willow and Maple barked excitedly while Honey burrowed against Ellie's side. Noah coughed and sputtered, but he was breathing. He was safe. The storm raged around them, but inside the circle of golden fur and human arms there was only warmth. Scout yipped in delight, bounding around Noah and the dogs, oblivious to the mud and the rain. Noah grinned weakly, reaching out to hug Ellie without hesitation. "You found me," he said, voice hoarse. Ellie nodded, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. Sonny pressed his head against both of them, tail wagging. As they made their way back to the festival grounds, Ellie leaned heavily against Sonny's side, Rusty guarding her left, River dancing ahead like a beacon. Willow, Maple, and Honey flanked Noah, keeping him steady. The Harvest Festival was abandoned now, booths' empty lanterns swaying madly in the wind. But in Ellie's heart, a new fire had been lit, one stronger than fear, stronger than grief. They had saved Noah. And for the first time in a very long while, she knew without a doubt she wasn't broken. She was brave. The storm howled through the trees like an ancient, angry spirit, rattling the last stubborn leaves from the maple branches. Rain poured in thick sheets, turning the ground into a treacherous sea of mud. Flashes of lightning briefly illuminated the forest, casting monstrous shadows that danced wildly against the trunks of the trees. It was in this chaos that Ellie Carson, barely 6 years old, pressed forward with fierce determination, her 6 golden retrievers forming a protective swarm around her. Sonny led at the front, his golden coat darkened with rain, but his movements sure and steady. Rusty flanked Ellie closely occasionally, bumping her with his massive shoulder to keep her upright when her small boots slipped. River darted ahead, his nose low to the ground, zigzagging like a bloodhound on a scent. Maple and Willow kept close behind, their instincts tuned sharply to the fear and urgency in Ellie's tiny, determined frame. Honey, the youngest, whimpered, but did not falter, sticking close to Ellie's side like a shadow. They pressed deeper into the woods, past the familiar paths of Lantern Grove, and into the wild edges where few children ventured even on sunny days. The rain blurred everything, the wind tearing at their clothes and fur, but Ellie held one thought in her mind with white-hot clarity. Find Noah. River suddenly barked a sharp, eager yelp that cut through the noise. Ellie's heart leapt. He had found something. River raced toward a thorny thicket where something red snagged against the wet branches. Ellie stumbled after him, heart hammering, and gasped aloud. A red scarf, Noah's, fluttered violently in the wind, tangled among the brambles. Ellie grabbed the scarf, clutching it tightly against her chest. It was soaked, the fabric cold and heavy in her hands, but it was proof. Noah had come this way. Sonny growled low, sniffing the ground with renewed focus, and River, energized by the find, began to bark and circle ahead, pushing further into the storm. Moments later, Willow's sharp whine cut through the tumult. Willow had veered left, stopping at the lip of a small ravine. Her body was tense, ears pinned back, tail stiff with anxiety. Ellie rushed over, peering into the gloom. Down below, partially obscured by mud and fallen branches, she saw movement. A small hand, waving feebly, a splash of muddy red jacket. Noah. Ellie's breath caught painfully in her chest. Without thinking, she slid onto her knees at the edge of the ravine, mud soaking into her jeans. Sonny came alongside her, gauging the distance and the treacherous incline. Rusty planted himself behind Ellie, acting as a counterweight as she edged forward. Sonny and Rusty worked instinctively together, their training and loyalty binding them to her every movement. Honey and Maple moved to the side of the ravine, whining softly, while Willow stayed posted at the top, barking rhythmically, a beacon for anyone else who might be searching. Ellie leaned over the edge, her voice rising raw and clear above the roar of the wind. "Noah!" she screamed. It was the first time in so long that her voice had torn free from her throat. Not a whisper, not a sob, but a battle cry, a desperate arrow aimed straight into the heart of the storm. Noah's head turned weakly toward her. His small face, ghostly pale against the mud, broke into a relieved sob. Ellie cast around wildly. She spotted a fallen branch sturdy and long enough. With Sonny bracing below and Rusty anchoring her from above, she extended the branch toward Noah. "Grab it, Noah. Hold on," she cried. Noah's hand closed around the branch, slipping once, then catching firm. Ellie heaved her small arms, trembling under the strain. Sonny moved behind Noah, nudging him upward with his broad chest. Rusty pulled back against Ellie, adding his weight to her efforts. Inch by inch, foot by muddy foot, Noah was dragged up the ravine wall. As Noah neared the top, Maple and Honey barked encouragements, their tails wagging furiously despite the rain. Maple pressed herself against Noah's side the moment he was within reach, her warmth and strength an anchor. Honey snuggled up against his other side, whining softly, licking at his muddy cheek. Finally, with a last, desperate pull, Noah tumbled onto the bank, sprawling against Ellie and the waiting golden retrievers. Ellie collapsed beside him, chest heaving, tears and rain indistinguishable on her cheeks. Noah turned to her, his voice shaking. You came." Ellie nodded fiercely, her hand tightening around his, her dogs crowding close in a golden, trembling wall of love and protection. The storm still raged, but it no longer mattered. They had found him. They had kept the promise written in every beat of their loyal hearts. They were together. And as Ellie sat there in the mud, soaked to the bone but alive, her 6 golden retrievers pressing against her in a living embrace, she realized something: she was not the broken girl she had thought she was. She was strong, she was brave, and she would never, ever be alone again. The next morning dawned bright and clean as if the storm had never happened. Sunlight poured over Maple Creek, turning the soaked streets into rivers of gold. Leaves clung to sidewalks and car hoods, and the air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. But there was something new in the atmosphere, something electric and buzzing, a ripple of excitement that spread from the town square all the way to the battered old farmhouse where Ellie Carson lived. Inside the Carson home, the kitchen was a whirl of warmth and motion. Helen moved between the stove and the small kitchen table, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs and toast with shaking hands. She was still wearing her faded floral nightgown under an old knitted shawl, her silver hair pinned up hastily. Her small frame was buzzing with nervous energy. Joe sat at the table, glasses perched low on his nose, scanning the battered screen of his ancient laptop. His face, usually lined with deep furrows of concern, today bore an expression of stunned amazement. "They're calling them heroes," he muttered, almost in disbelief. "The golden guardians of Maple Creek." Across the table, Ellie sat, bundled in one of Joe's old flannel shirts, her hair damp but clean cheeks still pink from scrubbing. Beside her, all 6 golden retrievers lay sprawled on the floor in various states of contented exhaustion. Sonny by her feet, Rusty snoring softly under the table, River curled up like a question mark, Willow leaning heavily against her chair, Maple and Honey pressed close at her sides. The night before felt like a dream now. After rescuing Noah, they had returned to the festival grounds where Amanda Holloway and Tom Bennett had been frantically coordinating the search. Tom, his rugged face blanched with terror, had scooped Noah into his arms the second he saw him clutching him so tightly that the boy had squeaked in protest. Amanda, too, had dropped to her knees, arms wrapped around Ellie and the dogs, tears streaking down her cheeks as she whispered prayers of thanks. It was Amanda's quick thinking that led her to pull out her phone and capture the end of the rescue the moment Ellie, flanked by her 6 golden protectors, led Noah safely out of the woods like a small, determined general at the head of an unbreakable army. She had posted the video to the town's community page late that night with a caption simple and full of heart. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear fur and walk on 4 legs. The video had exploded. First, the local Maple Creek Gazette picked it up. Then the news traveled to larger outlets, regional papers, television stations, and finally a morning show that aired a segment titled "The Miracle of Courage: How a Silent Girl and Her Golden Guardians Saved a Life." Photos of Ellie, tiny and mud-splattered, surrounded by 6 noble golden retrievers, were now plastered across every newsstand in the county. And with the fame came something more unexpected, an outpouring of generosity. It started with small donations. Neighbors dropping envelopes through the Carson mailbox, children from the school, stuffing crumpled bills into mason jars labeled "For the Goldens." Then came bigger gestures. A local hardware store owner, Mr. Lester McGraw, a heavy-set man with a booming laugh and a weakness for strays, offered free supplies for the dog's doctor. Patel, the town's only veterinarian, a tall, soft-spoken woman with deep brown eyes and an endless reservoir of compassion, announced she would waive all future vet bills for Sunny Maple River, Willow, Rusty, and Honey. And then, the crowning miracle, a local animal rescue foundation launched an official fundraiser online. Within 48 hours, it surpassed every expectation. Enough money had been raised not only to care for the 6 dogs for life, but also to repair the aging farmhouse and cover Ellie's schooling and living expenses for years to come. Joe leaned back in his chair, wiping his eyes under the pretense of cleaning his glasses. Helen set a trembling hand over his. "They're going to be okay," she whispered. Ellie didn't fully understand the scope of what was happening, but she could feel the difference. She saw it in the way her grandfather smiled. Now small, stunned smiles that cracked open the grim set of his mouth. She felt it in the way Helen hummed again when she cooked. And she knew it deep in her bones when she leaned down to kiss the top of Sonny's head, and he wagged his tail against her feet. Later that afternoon, as the sun hung low and golden in the sky, the town gathered in the square. Mayor Abernathy stood on the small wooden platform usually reserved for the Harvest Festival King and Queen. His tweed jacket looked even more rumpled than usual, and he dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief before adjusting the microphone. "Folks," he began, his voice echoing through the square, "Maple Creek has always been a town that sticks together. We've faced storms, hard winters, and losses that we thought we'd never overcome. But today we celebrate courage, loyalty, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return." He gestured toward the steps of the platform where Ellie stood surrounded by her 6 golden retrievers, Noah at her side holding Scout's leash. Ellie wore a simple blue dress Helen had sewn years ago, and her hair was pulled back with a small, delicate butterfly clip, the same one her mother had worn, found again in the woods thanks to Honey. The crowd erupted into cheers as Ellie shyly made her way onto the stage, her dogs flanking her like royal guards. Cameras flashed. Children waved small handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Ellie," and "We love the Goldens." Mayor Abernathy reached into a velvet-lined box and pulled out 6 shiny medals, each one engraved with a simple phrase, "Guardian of Hope." He bent down to drape the first medal over Sonny's thick neck, then Maple River Willow, Rusty, and Honey, who all bore the honor with quiet dignity, tails wagging proudly. "And," the mayor said, clearing his throat, "let's not forget our bravest citizen, Ellie Carson." He handed her a small golden medallion attached to a chain which she accepted with wide, glistening eyes. The sun broke fully through the clouds, then bathing the square in a light so brilliant it made the raindrops still clinging to the leaves sparkle like diamonds. It wasn't just a celebration. It was a miracle. A community that had lost so much had found something new, a reason to believe again. Ellie stood on the stage, flanked by her 6 heroes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like a broken little girl trying to survive the storm. She felt like she belonged. She felt like home. Morning in Maple Creek had never seemed so bright. The town, still brushed in the gold and crimson of late autumn, shimmered under a soft sunlight that warmed the very bones of the old brick buildings and the white-fenced porches. It was the kind of day when everything felt possible, when the breeze seemed to hum with unseen songs, and even the tired sidewalks looked new. At the edge of town, the Carson farmhouse was alive with quiet excitement. Helen moved briskly around the kitchen, her plump figure bundled into a cheerful blue dress, speckled with tiny white flowers, her silver hair pinned into a neat twist. She hummed as she packed a basket with sandwiches, apples, and cookies. Joe, wearing his best flannel shirt and suspenders, fussed with a battered old camera, muttering about batteries and settings he barely understood. In the living room, Ellie sat cross-legged on the worn rug, braiding Willow's silky fur with careful fingers. Around her, sunny Maple River. Rusty and Honey lounged contentedly, their tails thumping occasionally against the floor in lazy rhythm. Ellie's golden hair was neatly brushed, and a pale yellow ribbon tied it back, a nod to the special day ahead. The transformation in Ellie over the past weeks had been nothing short of miraculous. The silent, withdrawn girl who had once hidden behind her dogs now spoke in a soft, melodic voice. She still clutched her words tightly sometimes, but they came easier now, like spring water trickling through thawed ground. Much of the change could be traced to the dog training classes she and Noah attended every Saturday. Held at the town's small but bustling community center, these classes were led by a sturdy woman named Patty Jensen. Patty was in her late 50s, short and square-built, with cropped gray hair and a booming laugh that could shake the dust from the rafters. Having trained service dogs for 20 years, Patty had a heart as wide as the Vermont sky and a no-nonsense style that made the shyest child feel seen and capable. Patty had taken an immediate liking to Ellie, recognizing in her the quiet determination and fierce empathy that often marked the best trainers. Under Patty's gentle guidance, Ellie learned to issue commands, to praise properly, and most importantly, to trust her own voice again. Noah was always nearby, his laughter a bright bounding thing that lifted Ellie's spirit even on difficult days. His Beagle Scout often tried to cause chaos during the lessons, chasing his own tail, stealing treats from pockets. But Noah's patience never wavered. Together, the 2 children and their K9 companions made an unlikely, joyful team. Today, though, was bigger than any training session. Today was the dedication of the new community playground, a playground built in memory of David and Laura Carson, Ellie's parents, who had given so much of their lives to the service of animals and people alike. The entire town had come together for the project. Mr. Lester McGraw, the hefty hardware store owner, had donated materials. Mrs. Betty Withers, a sprightly widow with a love for painting, had adorned the wooden fences with colorful murals of children and dogs. Even gruff Tom Bennett, Noah's father, had spent weekends hammering and sawing, a quiet act of gratitude for the gift Ellie and her dogs had given back to the town. As the Carson family arrived at the new playground, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. The playground was a masterpiece, bright, colorful, and full of small details that whispered of love, carved paw prints in the climbing walls, a yellow slide shaped like a giant ribbon, benches etched with verses about friendship and hope. At the center of it all stood a small stage decorated with sunflowers and white bunting. Amanda Holloway, wearing a soft gray dress and a proud smile, stepped up to the microphone. Her ocean gray eyes swept the crowd before settling warmly on Ellie. "Today," she said, voice steady but thick with emotion, "we honor not only the memory of 2 incredible people, but also the living spirit they left behind, the spirit of courage, kindness, and community that young Ellie Carson and her golden-hearted companions have brought back to us all. The applause was thunderous, but Ellie barely heard it. She stood backstage, hands trembling slightly, the butterfly clip her mother's pinned securely in her hair. At a soft nudge from Sunny, Ellie stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple white dress that fluttered around her knees like a whispered prayer. Surrounding her were Sunny, Maple River, Willow, Rusty, and Honey, each wearing a bright yellow bandana printed with small, smiling suns. The music started a soft, lilting guitar played by Mr. O'Connor, the town's elderly music teacher with thick spectacles and fingers still nimble despite his years. Ellie drew a breath, shaky but full of quiet strength, and began to sing. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice, pure and clear, rose over the square. It wasn't perfect, sometimes it wobbled, sometimes it faltered, but it was real, and it was beautiful. The 6 golden retrievers sat silently, gazes fixed adoringly on the girl they had helped mend. Tears shone in the eyes of everyone watching. Joe and Helen clutched each other's hands tightly. Noah beamed so brightly he seemed lit from within, and even gruff Tom Bennett wiped a hand roughly across his face. And then, just as Ellie reached the final chorus, a gasp rippled through the crowd. A rainbow had unfurled across the sky, arching in brilliant color from one edge of Maple Creek to the other, as if the heavens themselves were bending low to listen. The townspeople whispered, some with hands clasped together in prayer. "It's a sign from heaven." Ellie's voice trembled once, then soared higher, a golden thread stitching together the hearts of everyone there. When the last note faded, silence held the square in reverent stillness before a roar of applause erupted. Ellie laughed a bright, free sound and knelt to hug Sunny, then Maple, River, Willow, Rusty, and Honey in turn. Around her, the town gathered in a circle, arms around shoulders, tears and laughter blending into one joyous tide. The sun rose higher, scattering the last mist of the storm from the earth. And for the first time since the world had broken around her, Ellie knew she was whole. She was home. In the quiet town of Maple Creek, a little girl, 6 loyal dogs, and a community bound by kindness reminded us all of a timeless truth. Even the deepest wounds can heal when touched by love, courage, and unwavering faith. Ellie's journey was not just about finding her voice again. It was about rediscovering the miracles that God weaves into our lives when we dare to hope. Sometimes miracles do not come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes they arrive on soft paws, in the quiet loyalty of a friend, or in the laughter of a child who dares to sing again. It is in these small, everyday moments that the love of God shows itself most brightly. Just as God sent 6 golden hearts to guard Ellie's fragile spirit, He sends people blessings and unseen hands to lift us when we fall. In our own lives, when storms rage and the nights feel endless, we can remember Ellie's story. We can choose to believe that no darkness lasts forever, that even after the fiercest storm, the sun will rise again. We can find the courage to trust, to love, and to walk by faith, not by sight. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is real. Leave a comment below and type "Amen" if you believe that God still works miracles through love and loyalty. Subscribe to our channel to join us in spreading more true stories of courage and faith. May God bless you and your loved ones abundantly.